Tonight, we talk about negative reviews.
But, I mean, when I first started out, though, and I didn't have a ton of feedback, I took everything very seriously.
The new dialogue trigger. What exactly can you do with it?
So, I mean, there's a lot of little things that you could do with that related to how a conversation plays out.
And what makes a good part one?
Think of it like an episode of Star Trek. You know, your part one is still a full episode.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's a very true statement.
And
the part one of Best of Both Worlds is a fantastic episode by itself, even if there was no part two.
Join us on the Foundry Roundtable.
Hello and welcome to episode 31 of the Foundry Roundtable, the podcast exclusively covering the Foundry for Star Trek Online. I'm your tame Foundry author, Drogan1701. With me is man who has different exclusives depending on where you buy them, Greendragoon.
How come you're like the tame Foundry author and I'm something weird every week?
Because I'm tame and you're weird. And we also have a man greatly feared by the 51st State Movement, Hippiejohn.
You know, I think we need to start thinking of something for him. We really, really do. Because you're right, he's always tame.
And I totally lost my rhythm here. And,
we did it, we messed him up.
Oh, that's never happened before.
Yeah.
Oh. You didn't expect us to go on the offensive.
Forgot, yeah.
We didn't even plan that.
And also, I left a placeholder for myself in Mark's introduction, and I forgot to think of a thing for it. So, welcome, Mark. And we have a guest with us tonight, Foundry author whose mission we reviewed about a month or so ago. Isthisscience. Welcome.
Very good evening to you all.
And we're glad to have him staying up late for us because he joins us from the other side of the pond.
Oh, I've stayed up with a nice cup of tea, as I'm English. I thought it was very cliche.
You wouldn't want to drink coffee this time of night anyway.
Oh, Lord, no.
And unfortunately, we start tonight with sad news. As many of you have heard, Mark Valentine, also known as H2O Rat, who led the team that created some of the really excellent videos for Cryptic Studios over the years, lost his battle with cancer on Saturday, September 7th. Our thoughts are with his family, obviously. He was just really wonderful member of the community. He was in the Starbase UGC fleet, which many of us here are a part of. And I personally remember chatting with him in the podcast UGC chat room over at Justin TV, which I thought was incredibly cool of a dev to come in and do that. So,
yeah, I mean,
he will definitely be missed.
Great guy. I know he was the kind of dev who, wasn't afraid to come on and, do like an impromptu interview or just hang out. He was also one of the few, developers to actually publish a, Foundry mission.
Yeah.
And the only one to ever get spotlighted that I know of.
Mm-hmm. It is spotlighted. It is, what's the name of it? Rising Phoenix Part 1?
Part 1.
Yeah. We are going to try and do something with that, next week. We're going to try and all play it and do a group review as well as, possibly some other things with it. But, one thing I wanted to mention is just the incredible outpouring of support on the forums. I mean, sometimes the forums can be sort of, you might say a wretched hive of scum and villainy, but, just the absolute many thoughts and well wishes and condolences expressed through the forums. I just think that's really neat.
I noticed there's a thread to try and get a ship class named after it, which I think is an awesome idea.
Valentine class, I like it. Well, moving on to other news, we have the big news, obviously, while we took a week-long break. Probably the single best Foundry fix that could come out did come out, which is the fix to long load times.
Yay!
I don't know about you guys, but my Foundry productivity has gone way up through the roof.
Oh yeah, it's definitely, it's like having a pain and then it's suddenly being gone and you just have this feeling of relief working in the Foundry.
Absolutely.
Oh, I wish that, that I were able to appreciate it more. I just have a lot going on in the real world at this point in time, so.
That'll happen.
It happens sometimes. I do appreciate it when I'm in there. What's that?
Why wasn't your life busy last month? when you needed the distraction?
A lot of reasons that are personal reasons. So let's move on.
Did we lose Drogon?
I don't know. You know, that happens sometimes.
Nope, I just had it muted.
Oh.
I was going to say, moving on, there are a couple of Legacy Romulus bugs that have not been fixed yet. The ice caves being half cut off, that would be the biggest one. So hopefully, we know they've been working on it. Cryptic Frost said so, and he just said that the difficulty was getting the fix to propagate out to the missions, I think.
Yeah.
But, you know, it really is a good sign, I think, that obviously they have been working on this. It obviously took them a long time, and they probably didn't have a lot of people on it, but, you know, it's sort of justification perhaps a little bit for those of us who said, you know, be patient, they are working on it.
And it was
It's good that we're moving forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I mean, Cryptic Frost, I know was it Brandon that came on and said, that the fax was in fact, from a programmer on the Stowe team.
It was Frost. Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, it came from the Stowe team, so there are people on the Stowe team that are working on the Foundry.
Or at least were tasked to work on this particular bug.
Yeah.
So, yay, they have attention.
I know there was a little bit of fear running around that, the only, work that was, getting put onto it is what the little attention the core team would, give over to Stowe.
Well, it does make sense that, you know, a Stowe problem would be fixed by a Stowe dev. I mean, you know, as far as new things being added, I'm sure the core team does that. But as far as bug fixes, I bet you that each games team does that. But I obviously don't know for sure. That's pure speculation.
Yeah.
So the other cool thing that we got this week, or last week I should say, I'm going to have Greendragoon talk about.
So, this week we got a surprise. I was actually playing around, I think it was Saturday evening, working on the Foundry. I mean, taking advantage of the whole fast loading times, or the loading times not being long anymore. And I went to go set up a map dialogue, and I needed to do a dialogue prompt reach trigger with it. So I get in there to select the dialogue prompt reach trigger, and I noticed that I've got a lot more dialogues listed than I do map dialogues. And to my surprise, I discovered that the NPC dialogue objectives were now registering with dialogue prompt with reach. And so I put it on the forums, and pretty soon other people were putting in, and I can't remember exactly. I think it might have been Kirkfat or someone else who that discovered that not only was it the NPC dialogue objective, but it was also default dialogue. So, I mean, if you remember a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the different types of dialogue, and at the time, only one of them worked with dialogue prompt reached. We now 3 out of the 4 dialogue types now worked with dialogue prompt reach, and this is huge. I mean, this opens up a ton of different options.
Now, for the record, which is the one that it doesn't work with?
It does not work up with pop-up dialogues on the storyboard.
Okay.
But in fairness, I mean, it's pretty easy to work around with, since you can have map dialogues also pop up. So
well, personally, I'd still love to have it work with that, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We'll take this win.
We'll take this win. And I also will take this moment to say once again that this was not in the patch notes. Please put it in the patch notes.
So, yeah, that's why I consider it, like, it's a great win. It's an amazing thing that we're getting to be able to do, but why aren't they taking credit for it? All I know is that after Dragoon, you know, tweeted him, hey, look, another thing snuck in that wasn't in the patch notes. I tweeted, why are the devs not taking credit for the, you know, like, the things we've been asking
good things, right?
for months? You know, they're sitting there taking all the guff from, and I mean, and they're getting a lot of it from some of the other podcasts out there. There's some real negativity. It's very sad, but it's, you know, it's happening. They should be taking credit for the things that people are going to like.
Yeah. I mean, I have 2 theories behind this. One is that this intentionally went out, but for some reason there was a breakdown of communication and it didn't get put in the patch notes. The other theory is
that happens regularly.
Yeah, it's not just Foundry stuff this happens to.
The other theory is that it wasn't meant to go out. It was something meant for season 8, and it slipped out.
Let's move it along to what we've been working on. So, Greendragoon, how are you doing on part 2?
Actually working on part 2. It's like, and not having to wait really long time for things to load. It's awesome. I actually got a lot done this weekend. I got map 6 finally drafted, which is that one I've installed on forever. And in addition to that, I was able to, it would have been a few weeks ago, Labor Day weekend, I was out, but I managed to get a bunch of dialogue written, and I got that incorporated in and managed to get map 7 drafted, which is awesome, which means I just have 3 more maps left until my mission is at least playable. And hopefully by that point maybe I can start working in a few people to start beta testing, make sure I'm not running into any flow issues.
Got to get some people in there to break your mission.
Yeah.
It's a valuable process.
The dialogue's still pretty rough. I mean, so there are typos and incontinuity issues abound, but you can get the general gist of it. I also got to work on a couple of fail-safes for people who managed to break the mission. So there's a couple of things that if they're like either in group, which thanks to you, Hippiejohn, helped me point out those, or if they manage to do something which I think is pretty impossible, but just in case it isn't impossible, they put in a fail-safe in that to basically let them know, hey, you broke the mission. If you walk over here, you can get it back on track.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, just putting that in, that was kind of fun. My first excuse to actually put my player character into the mission. Yeah, but other than that, I mean, got a lot of that done. And now this new dialogue prompt reach hit just at the right time because I've got some ideas about how I can use it on map 8.
Cool.
Excellent. Mark, what have you been working on?
I have actually done a little bit of work on one of my future projects, but this was starting to write the dialogue. I haven't done a lot in the way of map design. Although I did notice one really annoying thing when I was doing the map design about how sometimes the default map lighting for objects will make it so that if you add others of the same object type, it won't look right. Oh well.
Yeah, how about you, Hippie? Been able to get in the Foundry any?
A little bit of time I've been able to be in the Foundry. I've been, working. I went ahead and said, I'm going to enter the Foundry challenge now that the long loading time is gone.
Well, I should mention real quick that Brandflakes did extend the deadline to October 16th.
Yep, he extended the deadline by the amount of time that it was from when he posted it until the fix came in. Mm-hmm. I suspect he probably knew that the fix was. He did
say, "I hope we'll hear something in a couple of weeks."
Right,
it was about 2 weeks.
I have a feeling that he knew, and he was trying to be subtle about it, and just be like,
just in case it didn't work.
Just everybody chill out, kind of thing. But yeah, since that fix is in, I've decided to go ahead and enter the latest Foundry challenge, and I'm creating a Miranda Mayhem mission for the Foundry challenge. I'm making a cartoon, and since the challenge is all about the central plot has to revolve around time travel backwards in time. How far you go and what the mechanic of it happening is up to you. So yeah, I'm gonna have fun with that. And once, as my answer has been recently, I'm having fun making cartoons. There's a lot of bright colors in the Foundry, so.
I expect to be as zany as ever.
Science, what have you been working on lately?
Well, I've been slogging it every single evening on trying to get my submission to the Foundry Challenge, which is going to be a sequel to Rose Tinted Mirror, as everyone seems to be requesting it. I originally wasn't going to do one. I was just going to leave a little cliffhanger ending, but hell, why not? It's going to be a KDF mission. I'm trying to keep everything pretty much secret because, again, I'm going to be trying to do as many different plot twists as possible, particularly as I've got time travel. But one particular review to Roast Tinted Mirror ended on they wanted to know how their crew was going to get out of the fix. As it's a KDF mission, I'm not going to necessarily say whether you get out of the fix.
Nice.
So I should ask, you and Hippie, what sort of, how have you integrated the time travel? Like, are you traveling back to a particular space, or forwards, or bringing time travelers to your time, or which did you pick? Or have you decided that yet?
Oh, no, I've decided. I'm trying to figure out how to say it, without giving away.
You don't have to give away too much, but I'm curious.
I will say it involves time travel to the past a lot of times.
Intriguing.
I won't say who it is that time travels to the past a lot of times, but that's what I'm going to do with it. I want to take something from the now, travel it to the past a whole lot of times. So.
See, I have visions of Miranda Mayhem repeatedly traveling back in time, trying to prevent her bad hair day.
For my part, it's going to be a very simple go back in time, but the actual player traveling back in time is quite near to the end, but there's time travel embedded throughout the whole thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I was just asking because when the challenge first was announced, obviously the first thing that goes through your head is, what would I do? Even if you don't really intend to enter. And obviously there's been so much time travel done in Star Trek and in the Foundry. I mean, I've done time travel myself in a Foundry mission, so I mean, it's like, how do you make it new and interesting?
Traveling forward, I think, would be quite interesting, but it's so hard to do eras that aren't covered by the objects that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
If we had the Enterprise J. For my part, I've been working on a lot of map design and getting objectives laid down, getting ready to input dialogue. I wanted to talk in particular about a map that I've been working on. I just 100% finished it on Sunday, which is really a great feeling to 100% finish a map. You do not have to go back to that thing again.
Right.
I tried to, as close as I could, replicate the observation lounge on the Starship. So it's got, big windows on one side, which I used, let's see, what did I use? It was the glass display things from Utopia Planitia, with the logos and emblems covered up. And so a bunch of those in line, and then in between them, the colony lampposts to make sort of a window divider in between them. And so that looks out, I built this in the black space in the Rapier interior. This is a Federation interior, has a big chunk of black space between a bridge and another part of the ship. And something that's interesting I discovered about this map, which I want to tell everybody about, is on the south end of this map is a big star field, a big bluish star field that's just part of the map. I assume you get to,
I know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Because you actually, in the cryptic map itself, it's a backdrop. You look at it through the windows. But it's very interesting, so I made sure that the windows pointed that direction.
I don't know why they opted to put in an imposter backdrop instead of just using the normal backdrops.
Well, it creates a very cool effect when you pair it with some of those normal backdrops. Some of it you get this just sort of horrendous bloom effect coming in through the window. And I was experimenting with this, and I found a really cool one, because in the mission you go down into a gas giant to hide. So I wanted it to look like you were looking at a gas giant. So, my first thought was, maybe the Badlands or something like that. And I found one, the Kronos Great Hall Under Attack backdrop, which turns everything to sort of a reddish hue.
That's the attack of when
the Fakiri attack?
Yeah, it's during that arc, the Fakiri.
Which is probably not even in game anywhere anymore.
No, it's still there.
It's still there?
It's part of the Fakiri arc.
Those missions are still there.
So they didn't change that when they updated First City?
They made it a couple of minor tweaks, but no, I mean, actually, no, it still occurs on the original,
the original Kronos.
Klingon Kronos map, but I think they call it Klingon High Command.
Cool.
Yeah.
But anyway, the backdrop turns everything very red. and slightly hazy. And so I thought I'd insert some that say, why is it so hazy in here? And the person will say, oh, we've got some of the gases leaking in. Like when Voyager hid in the nebula in Year of Hell.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to encourage all authors, when you're building on an interior map, play around with the backdrops. Because you can get some really cool stuff.
Yeah.
One of these days when I'm not trying to get part 2 done, I still want to go back and do that cataloging of all the backdrops.
Would be great. I encourage you to do that whenever you have the time. All right, moving on to mission reviews. Greendragoon, start us off.
So, Hippiejohn and I actually played the same mission.
Yes, we did.
We might have been a little bored over the weekend and decided to
that didn't
play. Decided to play No Prize for Second Contact.
Contact Psi is was the name of the author. That's PSI. It's so Contact PSI, and it was a part 1 of how many parts did he mention? 4.
I didn't catch it.
Yeah, I can't. It's part 1 of bigger series than I normally sign up for.
Yeah. So basically, the gist of it is you are called in by Starfleet intelligence to, basically because this, ship has been engaged in, the precursor work to, engaging in first contact with, this, pre-warp or civilization that's about to hit, warp capabilities. And you, or just has. And you're basically called in because they found out that the Romulans, specifically the Tel'Shiar, have basically been sneaking supplies onto the planet, and you're trying to figure out what's going on. So you kind of take over the mission, and you end up trying to track down these Romulans, but it ultimately ends up you end up tracking them down to a base on the planet, and it kind of gets complicated when the local species notices. So that's kind of as far as I want to go without spoiling anything.
It's a complicated first contact scenario.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this kind of reminded me of, what was the name of that one first contact episode from TNG? The one where Riker gets injured and ends up in...
The name of that is First Contact.
Oh.
Is it?
Yeah, how convenient.
There you go.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of that same kind of a thing where, the Federation's getting ready for first contact, but something goes wrong and, it kind of messes things up. So, in this case though, I mean, it's not that you've, lost one of your people, it's that the, Romulans for some reason have, taken an interest in this and are engaging in operations on the planet. But I mean, it does a lot of really cool things. I mean, I definitely enjoyed the dialogue. He does a few things that, I'm going to say I'm iffy with, specifically related to the use of the player bridge, which I mean, is something we've kind of all harped on before, but he uses the, player bridge extensively, and he makes the player bridge the, Odyssey bridge.
Right.
Which of course, only one ship out of all the possible ships that the player could have has the Odyssey bridge.
That being the Odyssey.
So yeah,
and that also being the Odyssey that you have to buy. I don't think the free one came with it.
Right. No, the free one did not have it.
The one that I have doesn't have it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether I liked or hated that. It's kind of a combination of both, because I felt like it was just, he had to make a decision because the story that he was telling was taking place on that bridge. Although you and I, in playing through it, we did with our friend Baz there, we did talk about everything that took place on that bridge practically could have taken place in the ready room, and the door could have been closed. So yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like that would have been a better solution. There wasn't anything that absolutely had to take place on the bridge. I think he was actually using that bridge more for convenience, because I think he wanted to have a lot of situations where you did things like beam up, so he would stick you on the back transporter pad.
or use the conference room, so it'd send you down to the lower level. So it was mostly using it as a convenience. And as much as it would probably result in a few more maps, I'm of the opinion it would have been better if he had tried to send you to other portions of the ship. That said, I mean, I think he could have also gotten away with taking portions of that bridge and redressing it. I know you guys have done a lot of experimentation with redressing the Odyssey Bridge just to take advantage of things like the transporter or the lower conference room. He could have walled that off and probably had gotten away with it. There was another interesting issue. You noticed, Hippie.
All right, so we'll talk about the like two things that bothered us first before I like praise the rest of the stuff.
We'll end on a high note.
It was like everyone in that universe had no eyebrows, and it was really creepy. I mean, really creepy in some cases. I mean,
even like human characters and.
Imagine any character that should have an eyebrow, and I would say there was a 90% chance that they didn't. And the ones that did, only in one case did the color of the eyebrow match the color of the person's hair. I mean, the admiral that you talk to, the specialist from another ship that you talk to, the entire bridge crew, none of them had eyebrows. Now, I think what this was a case of is it's very simple to just, while you're creating a character, miss that drop-down menu for what kind of eyebrow the person has. Kind of like how there are some missions you run into where everyone is like, 4 feet tall that you run into because the person never changed the slider size. But yeah, it creeped me out on a couple of occasions, but they just had no eyebrows. That's all. The whole universe.
As Hippie said, those were the two big things we noticed. Other than that, though, it was a very deep mission, and I really liked how the author basically kind of really made the situation complicated in a way that was really enjoyable.
Yes.
It's definitely it harkens back a lot to like I said, that episode of TNG. And just kind of the trickiness of First Contact. And unfortunately, because it is a part one, we didn't get to see how it ultimately plays out.
Right.
But
as I understand it, the other part is out there. We can go out and play it. For sure. I found the storytelling on the entire mission to be top notch. I mean, if the two things that I found wrong with it were, I was a little bit bothered by the extensive use of a bridge that wasn't mine and the eyebrow thing. Those are the only two problems I had with it. The story was very engaging, and like you, I don't want to say too much about how he makes the first contact complicated, but he does, and it's really fun to play it when it gets complicated. This mission, I mean, this mission is everything I look for in a mission. It was story, it came in about the right time frame, it was fun, the dialogue was crisp, I think in the entire thing I might have noticed a misspelling, but the fact that I can't remember whether I did, he obviously did a great job editing it, which some people don't do. It was obvious this mission was made with a lot of care. And
just refining those issues. I think you had said that you had a little bit of issue with the crashed cargo hold.
He uses the map from the Jem'Hadar mission on the Federation side with the
it's the Hippiejohn mission.
Oh, Hippiejohn mission, not Jem'Hadar, right?
Yeah, that one where you get captured and have to break out of the force fields.
Out of the force fields. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Regardless, it's the map with the crashed runabout on it, and that is a really hard spot to disguise. It's huge where the runabout has crashed, and it just didn't, there wasn't a whole lot done to disguise that crashed runabout. I mean, I could run up on the the side of like the crash hill and see the runabout. And I was like, that's not a crashed cargo pod. That's a runabout. That, I felt like maybe a little more could have been done there. So again, that's just a technical thing. It didn't affect like what it did. It's a technical thing that did not at all impact my enjoyment of the story I was experiencing at the time.
Yeah.
So I think that says a lot.
I would recommend if the author did want to go back and take a second pass at that map, that there are a number of debris items in the Foundry, and I'm thinking of one in particular which is kind of it's supposed to be a piece of like a hallway, so you can kind of go down a little bit and you can see it's supposed to be one of the hallways. That would have been like a perfect for a crashed cargo hold. Then you could just line it with some like rocks, kind of make it look like the ground has been disturbed where it crashed into the ground. I mean, you could. I mean, there's definitely
there was a little bit
fun.
more that could have been done a couple of times with maps, but again, I think this was the author's first mission, and he's done more since. This is one of those cases where, even though, as I said at the start, it's like a 4-part thing that I normally don't sign up to play 4 parts of something. I'm like, if your mission series goes more than 3, and 3 I'm pretty wary of. It's usually only authors that I'm really confident I'm going to enjoy what I'm about to experience. So, getting me to commit to playing something past 3 episodes is pretty good. I really liked this, and I'm pretty certain that I'm going to play the others. So,
definitely high praise. Let's see. Science, remind me, did you have a mission you were going to talk about?
No, I haven't had time to do play any missions. I've been working so hard trying to get to this deadline. Wish I did though. Oh, except for Rising Phoenix. I did that the other day.
Well, that's an excellent one. I hear. Okay, I can talk about the mission that I did, which is Uprising Part 1, Off the Grid, by Man in Black 017. I'm going to have to apologize to him. I played this a couple weeks ago, so the plot is a little bit fuzzy in my head, but I know it has to do with space pirates. Coming from, where my background in gaming, which was, largely started with games like TIE Fighter, which is space sim in the Star Wars universe, which had all kinds of space pirates in it. So I love space pirates. But mostly I'll talk about, the things that I wrote down when I did this mission. A recommendation for space maps. When I first zoned into the first space map he had, all of the objects were on one plane. He had not adjusted any of the Y values. And this is something that I would recommend everybody do is play with the Y values so it looks less artificial. My philosophy when I'm doing a space map is I have everything the player actually interacts with on a level plane, usually at 0. But everything else, all the objects, the planets, they're all different Y values, so they look more natural. However, one thing I loved about his space maps is there was always something to do. There was something to go scan or somebody to fight. There wasn't a useless space map in there, and that's really excellent because that's something I've talked about on other missions where it was just a space map with nothing to do. There was a little bit of dialogue, then you're off to the next thing. And I appreciate when you make me spend at least a little bit of time on each of your maps to justify it being there. He had a damaged starship map, which was really excellent. One recommendation I would have, because part of it is you're searching for survivors, and I would recommend to him adjusting his objective names, because he has you talk to one survivor, and then the objective is talk to so-and-so, and he actually has them by name. And although it's possible you might have like a crew roster with you when you're looking for survivors, you'd have no reason to believe they'd be alive or on that deck. So until you found them. So I would recommend to him changing that to say find another survivor. You can keep the objective the same, which is a talk to contact in another room, but I would change it to look for more survivors or find another survivor, something like that. Something that doesn't spoil who's alive before you get to there. Let's see. On one of his ground maps, I noticed that, and this is something that I've struggled with many times when building ground maps, is if you have a hill and you're trying to put an object on the hill, you have to sink it in because otherwise the underside is going to be exposed. It's going to stick out into midair if it's on a slope. And a lot of the times these objects don't have a bottom to them. They don't have an underside. So, yeah.
When I do that, I like to put stone platforms under them, like the building block foundation thing.
Mm-hmm. That's a good idea. You can do that, or you can, just kind of adjust them so that they're sunk in properly if that looks good on the object. I wouldn't recommend that with crates, because then it looks like they're half inside the hill, and that's just weird looking.
Yeah, that's why I like the platform thing. It avoids the half-buried look.
Mm-hmm. That's good advice.
This is exactly where rotation would come in handy.
Yeah, if you could actually rotate them so that they were sitting on the slope at the proper angle, that would be great. Sadly, we can't do that yet.
Huh.
I think they might be able to do that in Neverwinter, but I'm not sure. I will mention that combat in this mission was very difficult. Of course, I was playing it on Elite with my best geared character. So, I mean, if you're into difficult, go ahead and do that. If you're not, play it on normal. And then one minor thing is that he had an objective that said he built this really interesting fort as sort of a headquarters for the pirates, and you go in and your objective is to rescue some captured crewmen. And his objective was called Infiltrate the Fort, which is not exactly what we were doing in the story, which was a full frontal attack. So I mean, if you're gonna do some sort of strategy like that, call it what it is. 'Cause that way we were just, full on storming the gates. So, you could do just attack the fort or storm the gates or something. Objective naming is something that you don't necessarily always pay attention to, but you probably should. That said, it was excellent, and I definitely recommend playing it.
I guess I just wanted to do kind of like a half review for the mission that I did. Anyway, the mission I did was called Star Trek Saturn Episode 3. The mission starts with a short recap of parts 1 and 2, which explains how you got to part 3 and your basic motivation for what you're doing. You start out by trying to find something that the guy you killed in part 2 had as one of his bases, I think it was. You start out by following the transporter signal that left the guy's ship when you blew his ship up. Then it's generally a pretty good mission, I think. You fight your way through his star base that he has. Then you jump to warp. It has a really, really strange thing that happens in the middle that honestly I can't say that I like, but it was very unique and different. I can say that about it. And then you track down a Ferengi who was working with this Gul Dharmaset guy that you fought in the previous chapter. Overall, the plot of it was pretty good, although in my opinion it had several technical issues, and it looks like the author is working on fixing those technical. So it's just a really short review for that one.
Okay. Is it a series you would recommend people play?
It is. I haven't played the first 2 missions, but from what I've heard, the first one is pretty good. So yeah, I think it's worth playing.
Okay. All right, on to our tech topic. Greendragoon. Dragoon.
It was on, sorry. It started halfway through into my...
I was about to say, I wonder if his mute button is on.
We all have to do it at least once.
Happens to the best of us.
Okay, so as I was saying, muted, I thought last week was going to be my final tech topic because I had reached the end of my list. And then we were handed a brand new expansion of a very useful feature. And so I thought I would cover the new capabilities of the default dialogue reached trigger and what we can do with it. So I will actually I'm going to start off with dialogue with contact and how that can now be used I'll get into default dialogue in a little bit. So with this new ability to basically track choice or which dialogue boxes are reached in a NPC contact objective, what do you guys think about things we can do with it now that we couldn't do before?
So I'm having a hard time wrapping my mind around the new things that I can do with it. I've been trying to think of ways to use it and just trying to read what people like in that thread that you started are writing about how to use it. I was looking forward to hearing you talk about some of the things that we can now do. Okay,
well, I'll throw out some things here. One of the things we can now do is hiding and revealing options based on which options they've already viewed. For instance, let's say you have an objective where you have to talk to this person who basically is giving you the explanation of what's going on, and it's divided up into several topics. You could force them to go through each of the topics in any order they want, but the final option to continue on is not visible until they've done all the topics.
Okay.
So you can kind of gate progression that way if you wanted. You could
you mentioned earlier that it could be used on the thing that started the whole bit was that it could be used on the default dialogue with object, right?
Yeah, I was saving that for next because it was the bigger one.
I have a question about that one. So let me hear what we can do with that.
The other thing that we can do is, say for instance, you have to talk to someone and basically convince them to do something, but you fail. He gets mad at you, and you can have like a bunch of enemies attack because you failed to convince him, and it could be a consequence for failure. So of course, once that you fight off the enemies, you can try again. And if you so wanted, you could have it set up so that there's a second set of options for the second time around, so that your choices change depending on how many times you failed. So I mean, there's a lot of little things that you could do with that related to how a conversation plays out.
Now, someone on the forums was talking about the possibility of being able to play more with dialogue failure using this. I wasn't quite sure what they were getting at.
Yeah, I wasn't sure at first, and then I got to thinking about it, and basically it means that if, say, for instance, they get to the dialogue box that represents them or a failing option, you can have things happen. You could do something where you can set it up where they can fail 3 times, and if they fail 3 times, some hint pops up and tells them or gives them an option to get past the issue. Or if you have like a person who was a puzzle, you could have them fail the puzzle 3 times and then have an option pop up to basically get around it, or have one of your bridge officers step in and engage in diplomacy, or something like that.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but this also applies. So we can now set something to appear or disappear based on dialogue choices reached in a talk to contact objective.
Yeah.
That's correct?
Yep.
Okay. Well, then we can actually stop advising people when they want to do sort of branching things. We can sort of stop advising them to do it all outside the objective panel.
Yeah, I mean...
Because that dialogue prompt reached is one of the big things for doing multiple paths.
Yeah, I mean, you could talk to a guy and ask you, do you want to go left or right? And depending on which option you choose, even though that is an objective, you can have the left or right way become passable. So, I mean,
and you can do that as part of the objectives rather than used to be you had to do that only with the map dialogue. That wasn't part of the objectives.
Yeah. So of course, the big thing, is default dialogue, and, the ability to now use dialogue prompt reach with default dialogue represents a huge amount of, capabilities we didn't have. And basically, this now makes it possible to basically fake a failure success scenario, outside of an objective or a map dialogue. Because of course the map dialogue is not tied to any specific objects. Yeah, you can have it triggered by, say, a console, but if you fail the map dialogue, it does not go back. That console doesn't start flashing again. It just minimizes down to that ops button. So you could have a console with a default dialogue on, and they have to solve the puzzle, and you've got your dialogue tree puzzle. If they manage to succeed, you can use a dialogue prompt reach to hide that console and replace it with another version that isn't interactable, and therefore, quote unquote, succeed.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge thing. You can also have, for instance, like an interactable console that continues to be interactable even after the first interact, that can control multiple things. So let's say you have like a central command console that can like bring up and down all of these force fields. You can literally have it controlling all of these different force fields based on what options they choose. Let's say you wanted to have a group mission where someone has to go off and man the master console and raise and lower force fields to allow the rest of the team to continue. You could do all sorts of fun things like that. I mean, it just I don't want to say that the possibilities are limitless, but they're significantly less limited than they used to be.
Yeah, I can already think of some places in my missions where I'd be like, yeah, I can do that now.
Yeah.
Where I couldn't before.
It just opens up possibilities, and it's more than I thought it was.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I think we're going to be finding lots of things to come.
Yeah, I imagine.
What to do with this.
And maybe that's our question to the community is, how are you going to use this?
Yeah.
In your missions? So that's our question for the community tonight. Why don't we move it along? Mark had a good topic, I thought, which is writing backstories for Foundry characters. Why don't you explain a little bit, Mark?
Okay, for the basic plot or topic that I was wanting to discuss is how detailed is detailed enough when writing about your own characters, or whether they're player characters you copied into the Foundry or characters that you created specifically for the mission.
Well, I would say, I mean, there's no hard and fast rule, of course. It's just sort of personal preference. And I would say, give me a couple of paragraphs. And it also depends on how you're weaving it in. But generally speaking, a couple of paragraphs I think is good. Tell me where they're from. Tell me, especially if I am to believe I've met this person before, tell me where I've met them. Or anything like that. Make sure it's not too many dialogue windows in a row. I would say, keep it to one dialogue window if you can. Obviously, I know a lot of people are trying to get to where most of their dialogue you don't have to. It's short enough you don't get a scroll bar.
Which is a lot harder than
personally, that doesn't bother me when I get a scroll bar.
Yeah, it doesn't bother me at all.
I'm perfectly willing to scroll. But that's one of the things that I really like doing is coming up with backgrounds for characters that I put in the Foundry. I don't know about you guys.
I do too. I question how much I need it to be in the story, though. How much I actively try to keep optional. Like, I guess if I have like the whole crew of a starship, which I do in some of the things that I'm working on that I haven't touched in a while, I have backstories for all of them, but I question whether I need them in the story flow, except in such a way as an optional piece of, I go to the computer and check on what information is there about the crew of this ship or whatever.
Yeah, having it be optional is excellent.
I think that might be the key for me.
Mm-hmm. I think creating backstories for all of the characters, regardless of whether you actually use that in the mission or not, is, I think, really cool. I did that for my big 5-part series, and in fact, I did a thing where I made a post on Starbase UGC where I had taken these backstories I'd written and using Photoshop, I made it look like they were on a Star Trek style pad. Like it was a data file you were reading. And so I put them up there, but none of that is anywhere in the missions.
writing a full backstory is very helpful for writing their lines a lot better as well. Once you have the backstory in mind, you can really add depth that you don't realize you're adding, and indeed it's also a good way of getting the backstory out without necessarily making it a biography, because it can be quite odd sometimes when you're going around and asking all and sundry about their personal biography. If you can kind of get it through in general conversation without directly asking them, that I think works a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think what for me might be pages and pages of backstory about a character might be a sentence in a mission. You know what I mean?
Yeah, just an offhanded reference to, I was at such and such battle. That was horrible.
Exactly, but I have the whole story somewhere.
I kind of break it down to two questions. The first question is does this information help the player understand what's going on in the story? If the answer is yes, then it needs to be basically primary dialogue. If the answer is no, then it can be in as optional dialogue. The second question I ask is, does this information help the player understand who the character is? If the answer is no to that, then it might be worth considering kind of leaving it out entirely. I mean, it's definitely possible to fill a backstory with all sorts of kinds of minutia about the character, but at some point, more information doesn't help them understand the character. And that's really...
And doesn't necessarily push the story along any further. Yeah.
But I mean, for me, whether or not it kind of helps define the character is where optional backstory dialogue really shines.
Well, this topic is something I brought up because it's actually something that I got a bunch of good reviews for when I did my mission Diplomacy in the Gamma Quadrant, is because I didn't write backstories for all of the characters, and some of them have only like a tiny hint of a backstory. But there's two of them in particular that I spent time explaining their origins, because I figured that not necessarily everyone who plays the mission would know who Loris was. Because, yes, she's a major NPC in a few missions, but she's not necessarily someone that, everyone... It's not one of those missions that everyone has played. So I figured that I would need to put in an explanation of who she was. But it's optional dialogue.
Yeah, and there's always the chance that even if they have played it, if they don't remember her or need a refresher.
Loris, so the issue I have, it's the 2800 is one of my least favorite. In fact, it is probably my least favorite of the 4 featured episode series. Part of that is because the character, I don't feel any weight behind the characters, and she's one of them. She's like the woman who takes over Deep Space Nine, and I don't really know very much about her except for that she can't believe reality for some reason, and I don't feel like, I feel like she's a character that would be open to a lot of interpretation, in providing backstory for her.
Because I don't think you get much backstory in the mission itself, right?
None. She's just a crazy woman who takes over Deep Space Nine.
I wouldn't say crazy. My take on the character was that she was someone who was it's kind of cliche, but she was just following orders. And her orders didn't include trying to decide whether or not the mission was still valid. So she followed her orders, even though what she saw in front of her seemed to be...
That's very true.
And very in keeping with the Vorta. Mm-hmm. And how they approach loyalty to the founders.
Yeah.
She would keep following her orders even if everyone else was telling her they were out of date, plus how does she know the truth of what they're telling her?
And, well, you see this when the female founder tells her to go back to the Gamma Quadrant. Loris immediately is like, okay, I'll recall the fleet now, and hails Tarukan within 3 seconds.
That
so
is kind
it sounds
of
like we're adding depth to some of the things that Cryptic has done, which makes me sort of kind of like it more, Just in this last couple of minutes?
I was going to say, I mean,
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
We didn't actually find out. It took seasons and seasons before we got any backstory on Wei Yun.
Yeah.
I mean, for a long time, he was just the representative of the Dominion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it was until that episode where the one clone, the defective clone, wants to defect.
Yeah. Basically explains.
I just got that. That's pretty funny. And yeah, he definitely explains a lot there.
But yeah, I mean, I think in Wei Yun's case, he was just such an interesting character, maybe because we didn't really get him.
And the performance was so good.
Yeah. And then, yeah, Jeffrey Combs, behind the makeup certainly didn't hurt.
No.
I didn't say it could be half that.
Which, by the way, happy birthday, Jeffrey Combs.
Yeah.
Yay!
It was, yesterday? Something like that? Sometime early this week.
Yeah, it's Roxanne Dawson's birthday today.
Oh, nice. And, also Terry Lynn Scholl from the GNT show.
Yes.
Happy birthday, Terry.
So happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Terry. Of course, this will come out days after your birthday.
Yes, many days.
Yeah.
That's okay.
All you need to know is that we are, in fact, wishing you a happy birthday on your birthday.
Mm-hmm. Yes. All right, so let's move it along. Science, you had a good topic. How to deal with negative reviews. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that, and tell us a little bit about this chart that you've created.
Yeah, well, my way of dealing with negative reviews tends to be a case of, does it make any sense? If not, oh, by the way, Dorgan, can I swear on this?
Maybe give me the opportunity to bleep you. That'd be funny.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's fine. Anyway, yeah, so if I don't agree with the criticism, then I stick it in my off box, which is a term that kind of comes from my sister's way of dealing with it. And it's a lot of people have trouble filtering out what is a valid criticism and what isn't. And I think sometimes you need to be quite rough. Some people let criticism get to them a bit too much. We've seen that on the forums a bit. So what I've tried to do is put together like a flow chart of how to go through whether you should be paying attention to this criticism. Mainly along the lines of, does it make any sense? What kind of issues is it dealing with, and whether you can do something about it? But I think the people who can give very negative reviews, particularly like sort of the 3-word reviews, they don't necessarily consider that it's a person behind it, and a lot of people don't consider how it affects the person, and how it's a lot more helpful to give more reasoning behind why you don't like something, rather than just say, no, this is rubbish, 1 star, which isn't helpful. It's rude, and it affects a lot of people quite badly, and puts them off from doing more Foundry missions when the mission is really, really fantastic. So yeah, I mean, I was wondering how else you guys deal with negative reviews necessarily.
I think mostly, I mean, in the more recently, especially since my mission has taken off, it hasn't affected me as much because I actually sat down and did the math and discovered only 8% of people who played my mission thought it was less than 4 stars. So, but I mean, when I first started out though, and I didn't have a ton of feedback, I took everything very seriously. And I got into this phase where I would actually, if someone said anything along the lines of couldn't finish 1 star and just something like that, I would actually send out in-game messages and go find out, hey, where did you get stuck? Why couldn't you finish it? Where did things go wrong? And I try to suss out as many details as I possibly could out of them via in-game mail. I kind of had to stop doing that as more and more people started playing it. But
I don't necessarily, when I mean about getting people to discard some negative reviews, I'm not necessarily saying that don't pay attention at all to criticism, because a lot of criticism is very, very useful, and it's telling the difference that's the important thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very, very much so. So there's an unfortunate trend that we all know is a trend, that a lot of people are trying to use the Foundry just to make their dilithium. And they get bored very easily. Like, you have to be able to look at people who accidentally stumbled on your story mission thinking that they were going to just, get their dilithium and it was going to be great. They're not going to enjoy your 45 minute to hour long story mission. And it's recognizing whether or not someone mentioned an actual concrete thing that was wrong. Now that can be a little bit esoteric, like saying there were mechanical issues with where things beamed in that prevented me from enjoying the mission or something. That's someone who's worth doing what I think you did there, Dragoon, which was email them, use the in-game mail to their @ handle. Those kind of people are worth talking to, but somebody who's like dumb, boring, like at some level you have to separate caveman-y type comments from 1 word to 3 word comments are no help at all. And so the person that was leaving them was not trying to be helpful in any way. They probably, without even maybe necessarily knowing it psychologically, they were bored by your mission or something, so they wanted to get back at you, and so they were like dumb, boring, without, as you say, Science, any regard for how having your work called a derogatory term feels as an author.
I should definitely.
Yeah, I was just going to say, at some level, you've got to discard those comments. And I don't know, I don't know how to do that personally.
Well, I mean, you got to remember that no matter how awesome your Foundry mission is, you may have the best Foundry mission ever made. It will still get negative reviews. There will still be some people who simply just don't connect with it. And you know what? At some point, you just got to decide that's okay. My goal here is not to please every single person who plays my mission.
You add to that, you can toss out parts of a review simply because they're rubbish, but keep other parts that are not necessarily good reasons for saying it's bad, but are at least not.
But you can glean something useful from part of it, even if the first sentence is "you suck," but the next sentence is "here's why." You might be able to glean something out of that second part. I actually wrote a blog post about this several years ago when the Foundry was first getting started, and I reposted it last year sometime. And I basically classified this was something I'd written after I'd gotten a couple of really negative reviews, which I posted even though I blanked out the person's name. And I classified them into basically there's 3 sorts of, you might say, negative reviews. Obviously, one is the drive-by 1 star. They said nothing, it tells you nothing. Ignore them. 2 is the epic fail review. This is like a 1 or 2 star where the person takes time out of his day to tell you exactly why you suck.
You have to consider that
at least this guy cared.
Is an epic fail is not really an epic fail.
Yeah. But people usually hyperbolize in these things. Even if it was a minor annoyance to people who leave these kinds of reviews, sometimes they will make it into a major annoyance.
Yep.
Or make it sound like one.
And that's another thing to remember about reviews is people leave reviews immediately at the completion of their mission. So whatever emotion they're feeling is very close to this, is very active at the time they leave their review.
Yeah.
So for instance, if Cryptic came out with some mechanic, and I'm not actually suggesting they do this, but I'm just giving an example here, that they had to wait 24 hours to post a review, I bet you would find that a lot of that hyperbole and a lot of that, a lot of those overstatements would kind of drop drastically. And it's just kind of one of those things that you have to keep in mind.
Yeah, possibly. The third category that I created for this blog was constructive criticism, which of course is not what I wouldn't consider that a bad review. It's just telling you something that is wrong, that it might be possible for you to fix. And I mean, those are the ones that you really want to pay attention to. I mean, you can certainly learn some things from an epic fail review, but more often than not, the constructive criticism is going to be more helpful to you. So, I mean, that's what I would say to reviewers is please leave that one. Tell me what is wrong and tell me what I could fix to where you would like it. I may not go with what you say, what you recommend, but at least that's out there.
One thing I remember from one of my first 2 missions was a guy who gave me a 1-star review saying that he couldn't beat the enemy mob at the end, and I later found out that he was talking about the first map, and that, well, I actually didn't change it. It's just that I took the time to ask the guy what it was about that, and then when I did that, he's like, oh, well, I don't actually play ground combat mission. And
so, alright, but I do have to play devil's advocate there just a little bit. That is a valid criticism. That's not something to just ignore. It
should get you thinking about combat balance.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. That's gotta make you at least think about combat balance, because that means that the mission is not friendly nor completable to someone who does not play ground combat. At the very least, you should put in the, if that's the case, if that's happening to someone, you should probably put in the mission introduction, there is ground combat here.
Yeah, I mean, if you're okay with the level of difficulty, which is perfectly fine. I mean, there's a time and place for hard Foundry missions, absolutely. Well, you want to warn people.
I actually did carefully consider what the guy said. It's just that the enemy group I had at the end of that mission wasn't really particularly hard.
All right,
lots of different levels of people who play the game,
Wasn't particularly hard to you.
As an example of how to weigh the benefit, or to gauge how useful the feedback is. I guess.
I think it's still useful feedback. I mean, I think that's still incredibly useful feedback to know that someone couldn't defeat the combat that I had placed at the end of a mission. I think that's really valuable.
I've had some of those myself.
I think that's useful when you have more than one of those. If everyone else finds it fine and there's one who says, I couldn't defeat this, then you're clearly looking at, that I'd say blame the player in a rather harsh way. But if you're getting like 10 out of 100 saying this is very difficult, then yeah, there's clearly an issue going on there. But I think it's like statistics. In isolation, they're not very helpful.
Well,
right, there you go.
I actually did do that sort of thing with one of the later maps that had more challenging enemies on it. But with this particular map, he was the only person who actually had that level of difficulty with it.
Yeah, and certainly when you get reviews and they have a suggestion or, a complaint, you have to look at all those carefully. And some of them you may say, okay, I know this person didn't like this, but I'm going to leave it as it is for such and such reason.
And there are some cases where you can't change something without causing detriment to the mission itself.
Yeah, possibly. And you might
I think
you would also
exactly
get conflicting advice sometimes. Right. You're going to get a column that, you're going to get a review that says this mission is too horribly difficult. And then the next one down will say this mission is too terribly easy.
Right.
Yeah, that's the Captain Gecko school of thought on that one. If you get complaints that it's both too powerful and too weak, then you got it just right.
Yeah, that's very possible.
I think what you got there, what you said there is so right, Drogan, in that you don't have to take someone's criticism one way or another. You could choose not to change anything. But my belief is if somebody takes the time to give you something that counts as constructive criticism, at least take a moment to think about it and look at it, generally speaking, and not dismiss it out of hand.
And I think we're sort of like the devs in this regard. I mean, I always like to say that nobody likes to hear this, but the devs are not beholden in any way to take any of our suggestions and use them.
None.
We pay for, if we pay, for access to the game. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no contract or something that we sign that says the devs must use our feedback. Obviously, smart developers do, but there's nothing that forces them to, and there's nothing that forces Foundry authors to even look at their reviews, for one thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, most I've gone through stages where I've been addicted to it and checking it every 4 hours, and things like that. But
we're in trouble if they ever integrate Foundry reviews into the gateway.
Well, it's like, goes back to what Captain Ghetto said, is that if you take all of your reviews and it gives you use it to make an average composite, that tells you a lot more about the actual status of things than any one specific review.
Well, I hate to admit that I think that one of the easiest ways to make yourself feel better about it is to do what Dragoon suggested doing at the beginning and figure out how many of your reviews are actually 1-star reviews out of however many that you have. Figure out what the percentage is. It's probably fairly small on someone who's taken the time to put together a thoughtful story mission. Just give it a look. Figure out those numbers. Those are very encouraging numbers sometimes. So,
yeah.
Makes me wonder
definitely.
if the I'm sure the devs take their own statistics and look at percentages of stuff, and then there's certain feedback that says, well, yeah, but only 3% of the players actually want that.
yeah.
Well, I think it was Terry Lynn who did a statistical analysis of a forum thread one time, which somebody had given her, had tipped her off about this thread, that it was a really negative thread. And so she went through and actually calculated it out over, how many posts were completely off topic, how many posts were actually negative, and by how many different users, versus how many posts were either indifferent or positive, and by how many different users. And she found that in that particular thread, it was actually mostly a small group of people making many, many negative comments.
Yep.
Yeah.
Rather than an overall negative thread. Yeah, I think she called it the thread of rage, something like that.
Yeah.
The funny thing is
the loudest.
Yeah, the funny thing is that I remember her article. I do not remember what it was. The subject was of the thread. It was rage about something. I think it was.
Was it mass cryptic?
See, and that's the thing, is that it's like, we can remember that the statistics are, really, you're not an overwhelming number of raging people. You're a really small community who just happens to get really loud.
Well,
yeah.
one thing I would say to sort of wrap this up is, there's one way to react to feedback, which I would recommend against, which is reacting belligerently.
Yeah.
Which is taking somebody who doesn't like your mission and going after them on the forums or in the game, things like that. Don't do that.
Absolutely.
In the future, I will refer to this as don't Orsi them.
Yes.
Do not Orsi them.
Roberto Orsi kind of lost it this week and was yelling at fans.
It was last week, but still.
Last week. There's some times where it's like, dude, I kind of don't blame you because of the stuff that gets shoveled at you, but still I would recommend against this.
Yeah.
We've had some people do this on the forums, and it does not end well.
Anger against anger only ends up in more anger.
I have on multiple occasions talked to people about why they put certain things into a review for one of my missions. I mean, especially like that one incident that I mentioned earlier. But
you don't want to, call them out and insult them and,
exactly.
Things like that. You don't want to do that.
I simply ask them for more information. Like, because a lot of the time when people give you things, they're like, oh, well, like with that one review earlier, that the guy actually didn't specify in the review what exactly it was that he couldn't see. He used several very vague terms, and it sounded like he was if you didn't know what the mission was, it sounded like he was talking about one thing, and he was really talking about something else. And asking him about that with an in-game mail helped me figure out what exactly his issue was with completing the mission.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have done that. I mean, it usually leads to some pretty good results if you do contact someone who left a review, and if you're trying to get more information, because of course one of the downsides of the review system is you only have that small little character count to do it in. So yeah, I definitely recommend, if you got an issue. There was one guy I know who pointed out a really huge plot hole in one of my missions, and what was very helpful when I contacted him and asked him for more information, and that helped me fix it, and told him that I'd fixed it, and he went back and left a 5-star review.
Awesome.
Now,
See, I've had similar experiences. I did it with Spectres a lot before it got spotlighted. People would tell me where something broke for them, and I'd be like, "Oh, I can fix that. Just go back and play it, see that it's fixed," and then they would up their star rating by 1 or 2. I've had really good results with contacting people actually like that.
Yeah, I know. I had somebody point out to me this week a plot hole in part 1, and it actually, I actually really enjoyed the discussion. Starzer C basically pointed out that I was asking why I didn't. The player doesn't just take a shuttle down to the planet. I actually wrote up this big old explanation of why taking a shuttle down would have been risky, but it was kind of right in the one point of is I didn't actually even consider putting that in as an option or try to explain why it couldn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I love feedback that really gets me thinking about it, though.
Sometimes all it takes is a little piece of dialogue that says, no, we can't, somebody points out, why don't they do X? And all it takes is a little piece of dialogue that says, we can't do X because.
Mm-hmm.
TNG was very good at avoiding plot holes like that.
Yeah. Although, there's plenty of good plot holes throughout Star Trek.
Yeah, plot holes are a time-honored tradition.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they get for having really smart fans.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Smart and nitpicky fans. I'm the type to more ignore plot holes myself. So.
If you actually, there's this one thing that somebody posted a link to on the forums that was actually very, very interesting because of the fact that it's a compilation of dozens of different things where various Star Trek episodes have contradicted each other in various things, like the whole
nice big flow chart there.
Like what is warp 10?
Yep.
How many different episodes have we seen in Star Trek where ships actually did go faster than warp 10, and stuff like that.
Yep.
Well, at the end of the day,
with a franchise that large, it's impossible not to have those kind of plot holes. But the fun is
spanning 47 years and however many writers.
Exactly, and all those episodes, on and on. You're always going to get those plot holes. But the fun thing is when the fans to whatever media come up with explanations, because there's an awful lot of explanations in the books that fill in all the plot holes from the series, and I think that's it adds something to have those plot holes and to try to fill them in. If you want to look at it positively.
Yeah, one thing to remember is that at the end of the day, Star Trek was made by writers just like us. They're normal human beings. Just as flawed as we are.
Let's move it on to a good writing topic that I came up with, which is writing for what I call non-traditional characters. Okay, so it came about by thinking about, how many non-Klingon player characters are running around in the KDF? Tons.
Way too many.
I have 3 Klingon characters myself, one of which is actually a Klingon. The other 2 are not. And obviously they have, crazy backstories. There's Vorta and a Zenkethi, so I think
the most common race to encounter for KDF players is, granted this is partially guesswork on my part, but the one that I remember seeing most are actually Orion.
Oh,
I would guess
you're not kidding. It's because
the scantily clad.
I'm not kidding. It's the drooling fanboys. I don't have one, but Yeah. But as someone who has 4 KDF characters like you, Drogon, only one of them is an actual Klingon.
Well, and this got me thinking. Can authors and should authors write for people who have those sort of non-traditional characters? You know, the non-Romulan member of the Romulan Republic, the Gorn Klingon captain. You know, it might be difficult. You would have to plaster it with warnings, but you know, how do you approach that? Writing for those characters.
Well, one thing that I have thought of in several discussions about this topic that have come up in the past is that in the case of Orions are a lot like Ferengi. Obviously they don't go into the whole rules of acquisition thing. That's a distinctly Ferengi thing, but in terms of being greedy, amoral, and...
Yeah, I don't think they have a lot of rules at all.
Orions are very, very much like Ferengi. So, I mean, well, a good example of this is players who did the KDF version of the First Contact Day celebration. You get the chance to go around the flagship of that's the new Vortis and talk to the various members of the crew about their perspective of the Klingon concept of honor. Then you get to this guy who's an Orion, and he's like, "You're kidding, right? Honor? No."
But I mean, you know, what would your reaction be if you only had a Klingon character and you loaded up a mission and the first thing it says to you, "This is not for Klingons"?
I wouldn't play it. I'd be smart enough as a player if
would you drop it in one
this
side?
mission. No, I wouldn't give it any rating at all. If I only had a Klingon character and I opened up a mission and said, this mission is aimed at an Orion who is potentially a member of the Orion Syndicate, or, you know, it will involve Orion story hooks and such, and all I had was a Klingon, I would not play it because the author told me up front not to play it. Now, I disagree that Orions are like Ferengi, but that's storytelling, the way that my mind works as opposed to, but I see them differently, but I don't see any problem with an author saying, this story is designed for you to be an Orion, a Vulcan, a Beta Z, or a Riemann, or, someone who's made an alien to be like a human in the Romulan Republic. The author is upfront about that. I hope that they were skilled in the race that they're writing and that I agree with their take on the race. But I would actually love that, honestly. I think the hardest thing of non-traditional that would occur to me, though, is the fact that most of these non-core races that we see running around are aliens with their own insane, crazy backstory that you can't even possibly begin to predict. Very true.
I mean, who could predict that I have a Vorta flying for the KDF? There's just no way.
Exactly.
So you would have to make it for an established race like the Gorn. A lot of people have Gorn captains. Lots of people have different sorts of aliens for the Federation. Like I have a Trill.
But I can't
remember what else.
That doesn't necessarily stop you. Let's say if you only have a Klingon, it doesn't necessarily stop you from playing a mission intended for Gorn. All it needs is for you to do a bit more RP over your character. Just accept that, well, this isn't my character, but let's play it for the story. Because if that story is really good, that story can really give you an insight into that species. If I came across something that's made for an Nephrosian, I would definitely play it even though I don't have a Nephrosian, because that would be fascinating to see the insight into the culture.
I agree.
Suspension of disbelief. So you sort of, for the moment, I'm going to imagine that I
the mission. The author's take on the Nephrosian civilization is simply because, we've seen them on screen, once, twice? There's
a lot in books and things.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot there you can draw on. It's like sort of, I was flicking around on Memory Beta the other day, and there's in, I think, the book The Romulan Way and My Enemy, My Ally, there's the discussion of the Romulan sense of honor, which is actually quite fascinating, but of course, and I think if that got into the game or into mainstream canon, it could make Romulans a lot more interesting.
Now,
Well,
we should always remember
it
that
actually does have some hints of this because when you play through the Romulan Republic storyline, that's one thing that they say about the Tal Shiar is that the Tal Shiar have dishonored the Romulan name, pretty much. Because like you said, the Romulans do have a concept of honor. It's just that theirs is very different from the Klingon version.
it opens it up for, making these very specialized missions, opens it up for the author, I think, to put in some of that interpretation. And we should always remember that the Foundry is the author's sandbox, not the player's.
Yeah.
Sometimes people forget that.
Yeah, this is a big sandbox game.
It's the only sandbox part of this game.
Yeah.
The issue with making the mainstream missions is that from a player, but by trying to write for every single species and occasionally providing a token Vulcan dialogue, you're losing so much depth that you could have by really, sort of exploring these species a lot more and exploring how you speak as, how many people give a Tellarite option?
Right.
Very few.
So you just kind of compress all the possible responses and actions of your character into this like grey space of it could be anyone, which is what the game's about in a way. But
one thing that I could easily see being a useful option to put in, at least for Federation side, would be Betazoid, because you have a Betazoid talking to this guy, and the Betazoid can literally hear what the guy's thinking while he's saying things, and thus that would prompt them to act in ways that others wouldn't.
And that was something that we were talking about before the show, actually, is that Cryptic now has the tech to tailor a response, a dialogue response from an NPC to your race. They do it in the new Klingon tutorial missions. Episodes. Or not necessarily tutorial, but their episodes. They reworked the old Romulan featured episode series a little bit to incorporate that, because obviously if you're a Reman and you want to be addressed as a Reman, and it changed a little bit so that it recognizes you as a Reman.
Yeah, actually, when I played that one, I noticed that when you go through the mission where you enter the vault, there's this option where if you're playing as certain races, you can be like, "Hi, nice to meet you," and then people will be like, "Please come on in," instead of you needing to go through all the work that everyone else has.
That'd be something that'd be incredibly useful for us to have.
Well,
so we could do something like that Betazoid option where if you are a Betazoid, it gives you the option to read their mind. How cool would that be?
Neverwinter's got that.
That would be
specialized,
so much fun.
Has a specialized trigger that basically allows you to not show things unless the player has a certain crafting skill. I could see that tech being expanded greatly to things like race and profession, or even like diplomatic experience.
That would be definitely awesome.
Well, so the equivalent of profession is, of course, whether you're tactical, science, or whatever.
It's basically our class.
Mm-hmm.
By class would be great. By race would be great. By gender would be great. All kinds of different things you could do.
Yeah. Kirk's already written stories where he really, really needed an option for showing different dialogues based on gender.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we move it on to our last topic for the evening, which is Hippiejohn's topic. He wanted to talk about part ones.
Yeah, this week I played 3 different part ones of someone's series, and in one case there was a booming success. In my mind, I can't wait for part 2. In another case, there was and I'm going to play part 2. I may not get to it right away. I have I have missions on my list of things that I need to play for reviews that I've promised people. And then there's another one that I liked it, but I probably won't play the rest of it. And I wanted to kind of hear from, hey, when people write on to the thread on the forums, they can answer too. But I wanted to hear from you guys when you're looking at a series. I asked a short time ago how much is too much, like how long is too long. But when you're looking at a series, what does part 1 of something need to give you to make you want to play part 2? And what makes it part 1 as opposed to where do you leave it? Where do you leave it as part 1, and what kind of things do you think that you should be wanting in part 2, I guess?
Well, that's actually a very good question, because this is one thing that I've worked with in some of my missions is you need to set up the scene for the later episodes, which means that you need to show players in I guess you would say a very vague way where the story is going next. You have to give them some idea so that they at least think they know where the story is going and want to continue on. If it's one of the things where the story ends and you're like, now what? That makes it a lot less interesting for players to want to continue. Like one series of missions that I did a long time ago, and I don't even know if they're still in the game, is Flight of the Kitty Hawk. That series of missions, I don't even know how many of them there are or were, but each of the missions, when you got to the end of it, I'm like, wow, next.
Yeah, you got it. That's the reaction you're looking for if you're making a series.
Yeah, is next.
You want to wow them with the first one.
Wait, I mean,
but leave yourself some room and place to go.
A bunch of cool details in it that made me greatly appreciate the writing skill of the person. Like, there's this group of Orion ships that sit in this solar system for several days, and because they're bored, they use the hulk of a Federation ship that they'd already destroyed for target practice. And then when you show up in the system, you analyze the remains and attempt to figure out just how many times the ship got shot after it was destroyed. It was just one of the things that the way it was explained in the story is it just hooked me into wanting to see where things went from there.
I really connected to what you said there about theme. Like anything that's a multi-part series probably has some sort of a theme or overlying concept behind it, and it's really important for that first episode to establish that, I think.
Yeah, you definitely have to set the expectations of to the player, so they basically have an idea of what to expect from this series.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of the general level. Getting down to the really specific level, one good approach is a good cliffhanger. That, something just completely, that leaves you right in the middle of something and you're like, but I want to know what happens next.
Well, that's the key right there, is that you got to make sure that they want to know what happens next.
Mm-hmm.
It's entirely possible to not sell them well enough in the first part. So
your cliffhanger, they just like, I don't care.
Yeah.
That was actually my biggest complaint about Scout's edition, is the way he ended it with explaining nothing. You go around, you look at things, you do things. It's awesome. It's great. And then instead of explaining something, the story's like, okay, time for part 2.
There's a danger in making part 1 too short, I think. I've played some part 1s recently, or things that people plan to be part 1s that are just over in like 3 maps. And I think when you could add a whole nother mission in there, and it wouldn't be longer than a normal mission. Think of it like an episode of Star Trek. Your part 1 is still a full episode.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's a very true statement.
Part one,
the part 1 of Best of Both Worlds is a fantastic episode by itself, even if there was no part 2.
a lot of it really isn't about the Borg, but how the crew are dealing with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's about Picard and his struggles. It's about Riker versus Shelby and, all kinds of different things.
I think for me a cliffhanger does go a really long way to making me think I'm going to continue with the series.
It certainly had an impact on us, for Greendragoon's mission specifically.
Yeah. That's true. That's true.
He has a hell of a cliffhanger there. I know when I made a part 1, it didn't have a huge cliffhanger in my big series. I've recently made another mission that does end on what's going to be a cliffhanger as soon as I ever get part 2 done. But I'm not going to say too much more about that. You can do it in non-cliffhanger style as well. I mean, you think like the first Star Wars movies. The first one does not end on a cliffhanger. The rebels win, they blow up the Death Star. The only sequel hook is Darth Vader flying off into space. Spoiler! I really hope you people have all seen Star Wars by now.
Yeah,
Come on.
Honestly, after seeing that again, after watching the Inspector Gadget shows, is that Darth Vader flying off at the end. Now when I watch that, I just visualize him going, "I'll get you next time, Gadget."
Yeah.
You should tag the show with Star Wars spoiler warning. Mm-hmm. We'll get so many hits.
I just spoiled a movie from 1969?
It was 77.
77? Right,
Uh-huh.
69 was the first start, the original series, right?
I used to work with a guy who had never seen Star Wars.
Actually, I think 69
Really?
was when they showed the last episode. Or am I thinking of Godzilla?
I don't know. I wasn't alive then, so. But that one doesn't have a cliffhanger other than a little bit of a sequel hook. So I mean, you can do it that way where it is, the first episode is self-contained enough that people are okay whether they go play part 2 or not. And part 2 just sort of picks it up and takes it all up to 11 and goes off in another direction.
Well, I'd say the mission we did not too long ago of Valley of the Shadow was kind of one of those where it's not really a cliffhanger, but it definitely leaves some hooks open for the continuation.
Well, in my case, personally, the only time I make a mission a 1 of 2 is for time reasons. That's the reason why the first 2 missions I ever published were part 1 of 2. They ended on a cliffhanger. Is that one of them, I literally used up all of the maps the Foundry would let me use, and I wasn't done telling the story that I wanted to do. The other one is that it only had a few maps, but it took a while to get through them. So I decided that, okay, this is a good place to put in a break. And
That's definitely a good thing. I mean, if your mission is getting to where you're either hitting the map limit or to where it's getting to where somebody playing it would take 3 hours, that's a good indication to you that maybe you ought to make it a 2-parter, split it in half. And then you just gotta make sure that you split it at a good place.
I know I've said this in the past, but I definitely think that a good first part should have its own arc. There's obviously the overarching arc that goes through the entire series, but part 1 should have its own arc to it.
Each one needs to have the full beginning, middle, and end. It needs to be a story in itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
In Bavat's Legacy, the ending point that I had for the first part, it was you fight your way to the entrance to Jagor's base, and that's where part 1 ends, is when you get to the base. That way, part 2 picks up as soon as you enter the base.
Whereas finding that place to split it can be a bit difficult if you've already got the mission pretty much going. I mean, you say, okay, do I put it here? Do I put it here? What's the best part going to be?
Right.
And I don't know, maybe that's a place where you could, kind of pitch it to somebody and say, where would you split this? Get some outside input.
It's probably easier to split it at an unnatural place if you're releasing both parts at the same time, so the person can go straight on and play the second part. But if there's going to be like a several-month gap between the two, it needs to make sense in a narrative way, definitely.
That's good advice. Unless you're Green Dragoon.
People, don't do what I do.
Yeah, I've noticed a lot of that. Do what we say, not what we do. I'm sure I've broken every quote-unquote rule in the book.
Yeah.
Of course, this is the Foundry. We write our own book.
Wisdom is something you earn.
All right, guys. Well, we're getting close to our time limit here. So we're going to wrap things up. I just wanted to say one last thing to the community. I see a lot of things pop up, threads pop up on the board. People dissatisfied with the Romulan storyline for one reason or another. There was one asking today, how would you rewrite this? And I've popped into a couple of these threads and left this message. If you don't like the cryptic storyline, we have a tool for you to fix it.
Yeah.
Write your own.
Tool for you to write your own.
And I absolutely welcome people to write alternative Romulan storylines. I would love to play them.
Yeah.
So please, I challenge you. Write me some Romulan storylines where I am, the worst, most cruel Tal Shiar agent there's ever been.
I will play it.
I will play it.
I don't promise I'll like it. I never promise I'll like your mission if I play it. But
I mean, hey, Cryptic gave us both the Tal Shiar uniform and the RRW prefix.
Mm-hmm.
I know.
So
yeah, put it out there for people who want to RP as a member of the Romulan Empire military or the Tal Shiar or anything. So that's my challenge to the community. I want to see those missions. But
nice.
For now, we will say goodnight.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.